An ex-sniper bought a remote mountain. When poachers crossed his fence, they never came back. While kids his age were running around, getting into trouble, or daydreaming about impossible things, John was already observing the world with a quiet intensity. He would sit for hours in the backyard of his family home, watching birds, squirrels, and even insects, noticing how each moved, how each reacted to the world. There was a patience about him that people sometimes found unnerving, but it was exactly what would later shape the man he became. As he grew older, John's sense of purpose became clearer. He wanted to serve, to make a difference, and to challenge himself in ways that most people couldn't even imagine. He joined the military when he was just 18, drawn not by adventure or fame, but by the discipline, structure, and skill the Army offered. Life as a soldier was not easy. Early mornings, long marches, and grueling training sessions were only the beginning. What truly shaped John was his role as a sniper. It wasn't about violence for him. It was about precision, patience, and responsibility. Every decision, every action mattered. One wrong move could mean disaster. The years in service changed him in ways both visible and invisible. His eyes seemed sharper, his reflexes quicker, and his mind always calculated, always aware. He could read situations, people, and even nature itself with uncanny accuracy. But there was a price to pay. John carried memories of missions, some that were praised as heroic, others that left scars he could never show on the outside. He had saved lives, but he had also ended lives. Every action, every shot remained with him. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, he would wake up drenched in sweat, remembering moments he wished he could forget. After more than a decade in the military, John knew it was time to step away. Civilian life called, but it was nothing like what he had imagined. The city, with its noise, crowds, and constant movement, felt suffocating. People rushed without purpose, distracted by things that seemed trivial to John. The bright lights of skyscrapers, the honking of cars, and the endless chatter were overwhelming. He tried to adjust, finding a small apartment, a steady job, and even attempting casual friendships, but nothing felt right. His mind was always on the move, replaying old missions, analyzing new situations, and looking for a sense of control and peace he couldn't find among the crowds. One day, while scrolling through pictures of mountains, forests, and remote landscapes, an idea struck him. What if he could escape completely, not just for a vacation but permanently, not just for a weekend but for life? The thought was thrilling and terrifying at the same time. He wanted a place where he could hear himself think, where the air was clean and crisp, where the land stretched out for miles without interruption. A place where the only sounds were the wind, the birds, and the rustling of trees. That day, John decided he would leave the city behind and find his own sanctuary in the wilderness. The search was not easy. John knew he wanted isolation, but it had to be more than just a quiet place. He needed land he could manage, land he could protect, and land that felt alive. After months of searching, he finally found it. A remote mountain property tucked away in a valley, far from towns, roads, or neighbors. The land was rugged, with steep cliffs, thick forests, and a stream that wound through the lower slopes. It was challenging, yes, but exactly what John wanted. It was perfect. Buying the mountain was a turning point in John's life. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of true freedom. He packed his belongings, sold his apartment, and said goodbye to the city forever. The day he arrived at the mountain, he stepped out of his old truck and breathed in deeply. The air was unlike anything he had felt in years. It was pure, heavy with the scent of pine and earth, and it filled him with a calm he had almost forgotten existed. He stood at the edge of the property, looking out over the vast expanse, and for the first time in a long time he smiled. Not a small smile, but one that reached his eyes, a smile of relief, excitement, and a quiet joy. Living on the mountain was not easy at first. The terrain was tough, and John had to adjust to the rhythms of nature. He woke with the sun, learned the patterns of the animals, and discovered the best places to get water and firewood. Each day was a challenge, but it was a challenge that brought him peace instead of stress. He began to feel alive in a way he hadn't for years. The world outside seemed distant and irrelevant, replaced by the immediacy of survival, observation, and connection to the land. Despite the solitude, John never felt lonely. He had friends in the city he could call occasionally, and he sometimes exchanged letters with family. But here, on the mountain, he was entirely responsible for himself. That responsibility became his meditation. Every day, he honed skills he had learned in the military in new ways. He built shelters, maintained tools, and studied the movements of wildlife. His precision and patience, once used in life-and-death situations for others, now served him in building a life that was truly his own. As the months passed, John's connection to the land deepened. He planted small gardens, repaired trails, and created quiet spaces to sit and reflect. He began to understand the rhythms of the mountain, the seasons, the rains, the storms, and the animals that called it home. Each discovery, no matter how small, brought satisfaction. He realized that this was what he had been searching for all along, not just escape, but harmony. The mountain did not demand anything that John could not give, and in return, it offered him a sense of peace he had never known. However, even in isolation, John's military instincts never left him. He knew that remote land came with its own risks. There were wild animals, sudden storms, and sometimes people who did not respect boundaries. He began thinking about security, not out of fear but out of wisdom. He reinforced certain areas, created safe shelters, and planned escape routes in case of emergencies. These precautions were not burdensome, they were comforting. John felt prepared for whatever might come, and that preparation itself brought a new layer of peace. In this first part of his new life, John Matthews transformed from a man burdened by memories into a man in control of his own destiny. The mountain became more than land. It became a living companion. The wind through the trees, the quiet nights, and the distant call of animals all became part of his daily life. He learned patience on a new level, understanding that the mountain had its own pace and that rushing would only cause mistakes. His past as a sniper, his discipline, and his ability to observe and calculate every detail of his surroundings all served him now, not to harm, but to live fully and responsibly in a world that was entirely his own. By the end of the first year, John had settled into a rhythm that felt natural. He was healthier, stronger, and more focused than he had been in years. Nights were spent by the fire, thinking, reading, and sometimes just listening to the mountain breathe. Days were filled with work, exploration, and observation. He had finally found the peace he had been searching for since leaving the army, a peace that was earned through effort, skill, and respect for the world around him. John's story in this part is one of transformation. From soldier to civilian, from city dweller to mountain guardian, he had learned that true freedom was not about escaping responsibilities, but about taking responsibility for oneself and one's surroundings. This was just the beginning, the foundation for the next chapters of his life, where the mountain would not only bring peace, but also unexpected challenges that would test his skills, patience, and wisdom in ways he had never imagined. John had always been a careful man, but the mountain taught him that caution alone was not enough. Living in such remote isolation meant he had to rely on himself for everything. There were no neighbors to call if something went wrong, no stores to run to if he needed supplies, and no hospitals within hours in case of injury. The mountain demanded respect, and John was determined to earn it. From the moment he settled in, John began shaping his property into a space that was both livable and secure. At first, he built simple structures: a small cabin made of wood he had harvested from the surrounding forest, a workshop for tools, and a storage shed for food and supplies. Each structure was carefully designed, not only to provide comfort but also to withstand the mountain's harsh conditions. Winters could be brutal, with snow piling high and temperatures dropping far below freezing. Storms often rolled in without warning, carrying strong winds that could knock down trees and flood the lower paths. John learned quickly how to protect his property and ensure his survival during such events. As days turned into weeks, John realized that isolation came with more than just physical challenges. There was also the matter of wildlife. The mountain was home to deer, foxes, wild boars, and even the occasional bear. While John respected these animals, he understood that they could be dangerous, especially if surprised or cornered. He began studying the movements of each species, learning where they roamed, what they ate, and how they interacted with each other. Every morning, he would walk along the trails he had cleared, observing tracks in the mud, listening to distant calls, and noting subtle changes in the environment. His military training gave him an edge in observation, but nature required patience rather than speed, and John quickly adapted to this slower, more deliberate way of thinking. Security also became a priority. The mountain was far from civilization, but it was not completely isolated from human activity. People sometimes ventured deep into the wilderness, either exploring or, more troublingly, hunting illegally. John had heard stories from nearby towns of poachers entering protected areas, setting traps, and causing harm to the wildlife. The thought that someone could trespass on his land and disrupt the delicate balance of the mountain did not sit well with him. He did not seek conflict, but he knew he had to prepare for the possibility. Using his knowledge from years in the military, John began designing security measures. He marked the boundaries of his property clearly, using both natural and artificial barriers. Fences were built along critical points, designed not only to mark the perimeter, but also to slow down any potential intruders. John installed motion-sensitive lights that could illuminate sections of the property at night, and set up cameras that allowed him to monitor activity from his cabin. He even constructed small observation posts at high points on the mountain, hidden among the trees, giving him a clear view of the surrounding areas. These posts were simple but effective, and they gave John a sense of control over the land that he had never felt before. Despite all this preparation, John wanted his mountain to remain a natural sanctuary. He did not want it to feel like a fortress in a way that disturbed the wildlife or the beauty of the land. Every fence was carefully placed to minimize interference with the animals' paths. Observation posts were camouflaged with branches and leaves. Even the motion lights were positioned so that they only activated in areas that would not disturb the deer or other creatures. John understood that living in harmony with nature required respect, foresight, and restraint. The balance between security and freedom became one of his guiding principles. Life on the mountain also required John to become incredibly self-reliant. He had to grow some of his own food, manage water sources, and handle repairs himself. Each day began early, often at the first light of dawn when the forest was still quiet, and the world seemed untouched by human activity. Mornings were spent checking equipment, maintaining structures, and preparing for whatever the day might bring. Afternoons might involve clearing new paths, chopping wood, or exploring deeper into the forest to understand the land better. Evenings were reserved for reflection, writing notes about wildlife, weather patterns, and any unusual events he observed. One of John's favorite routines became watching the sunset from a ridge overlooking the valley. As the sun dipped below the mountains, the sky would turn shades of orange, pink, and purple, and the forest would come alive with the sounds of birds returning to their nests and animals moving through the underbrush. He often felt a deep sense of gratitude in those moments, a quiet joy that he could hardly put into words. This was the peace he had been searching for all those years in the army and the city, a peace earned through hard work, patience, and careful observation. However, the tranquility of the mountain was not without its challenges. Harsh weather could arrive suddenly, and John had to learn how to read the sky, the clouds, and the behavior of animals to anticipate storms. Once, a heavy snowstorm struck unexpectedly, trapping him in his cabin for 3 days. He used the experience to strengthen his preparation, stockpiling extra supplies, reinforcing his cabin, and creating a system to signal for help if needed. Each challenge made him more capable, more confident, and more connected to the land. As John's understanding of the mountain grew, he also began to notice human activity nearby. At first, it was small things: footprints near the edges of his property, discarded wrappers, or distant gunshots from hunters who were unaware of his boundaries. These incidents reminded him that even remote mountains were not completely safe from intrusion. While he did not want confrontation, he knew that he had to protect the land he cared about. The thought of poachers harming the wildlife or destroying the environment filled him with determination. John began thinking about ways to deter intruders without putting himself or others at risk. He created clear signs marking the boundaries and warning against trespassing. He used cameras and lights to monitor activity and learned how to move silently through the forest to observe without being seen. His goal was not to create fear, but to prevent harm and protect the sanctuary he had worked so hard to build. Every measure he implemented was carefully considered, combining his military skills with his deep respect for nature. Over time, John developed a rhythm and routine that made him feel completely in control of his life on the mountain. He learned to live with minimal dependence on outside resources, relying on his skills, knowledge, and careful planning. He became a master of observation, able to notice the smallest details in the forest that most people would miss. A broken branch, a displaced rock, or a faint trail in the mud could tell him where animals had passed or where humans might be intruding. His attention to detail, once used to survive in life-and-death situations, now allowed him to live harmoniously and safely in one of the most beautiful and challenging environments he had ever known. John also learned the value of patience. In the army, patience was important for survival, but on the mountain it became a way of life. He would spend hours sitting quietly, watching deer graze, foxes hunt, or birds build their nests. He observed how the seasons changed, how snow melted into streams, and how the forest grew and transformed with each passing month. These observations taught him that life moved at its own pace and that forcing or rushing anything could lead to mistakes. Living in harmony with the mountain required adapting to its rhythms and respecting its rules. By the end of the first year, John had transformed his property into a safe, thriving sanctuary. Wildlife roamed freely, the forest was alive with sound and movement, and he had established routines that allowed him to live comfortably, even in isolation. His cabin was secure, his tools were organized, and he had systems in place for emergencies. He had turned the mountain into a space where life could flourish, where he could live fully, and where he could be both guardian and participant in the natural world around him. John's experience on the mountain showed him that true independence was not about avoiding challenges, but about facing them with skill, preparation, and respect. He understood that the land was both fragile and powerful, capable of giving life and presenting dangers. He had learned to navigate these realities with care, creating a life that was not only sustainable but deeply rewarding. As the sun set on another quiet evening, John reflected on how far he had come. From a soldier burdened by memories to a man mastering the wilderness, he had found a new purpose. His mountain was more than property. It was a living, breathing home, a testament to his dedication, patience, and respect for life. He knew that this was just the beginning. and that the challenges of protecting his sanctuary might test him in ways he had never imagined. But he also knew that he was ready, equipped not only with skills and experience, but with the wisdom that came from truly living in harmony with the land. Life on the mountain had settled into a rhythm, but John Matthews knew that peace was fragile. The wilderness, as beautiful and rewarding as it was, always carried the possibility of unexpected challenges. John had grown comfortable with the solitude, with the sounds of birds at dawn and the rustle of deer through the underbrush. Yet, he never let himself become careless. His military training had taught him that vigilance was not just about fear. It was about respect for the environment and understanding the world around him. One afternoon, as he walked along a narrow ridge he had cleared months earlier, John noticed something unusual. The snow from the previous night had left clear tracks along the trail. Deer and foxes were expected, but these were not the delicate prints of wildlife. They were larger, deeper, and uneven, like someone had been moving quickly through the forest with heavy boots. John crouched behind a fallen log and studied the trail. The tracks were heading toward his property. A chill ran through him, not of fear but of awareness. He knew that these signs were not natural visitors, they were people. John did not panic. He had anticipated this possibility. Over the past year, he had prepared for human intrusion with as much care as he had learned to respect the animals. His fence, observation posts, and hidden cameras were all designed not to startle wildlife, but to monitor the movement of humans. He quietly retraced the path to his nearest observation post, camouflaged on a high ridge overlooking a small clearing near the edge of his property. From there, he had a perfect view without being seen. Hours passed as he waited. The sun began to dip behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Then he saw them, two men moving carefully but confidently through the trees, carrying what looked like rifles. They were likely poachers, as he had feared, drawn to the area by rumors of wildlife or perhaps by curiosity about the remote mountain he now called home. John observed them for several minutes, noting their behavior, listening to their muffled conversation, and making mental notes. These men were experienced, but they were also careless in ways that would soon cost them. John did not rush to confront them. He knew that the right timing, patience, and strategy would allow him to protect his land without escalating danger unnecessarily. He retreated to his cabin, preparing quietly for what might come. Inside, he reviewed the security measures he had set up and ensured that all cameras and sensors were active. He packed essentials he might need if he had to move or defend the property, and he positioned himself near a vantage point where he could see the intruders without being seen. For John, this was not about aggression. It was about responsibility. This was his home, and he had a duty to protect it and the wildlife within it. As darkness fell, the poachers approached the edge of his property. They were clearly unaware of the measures John had put in place. The first motion sensor activated, and a low hum of lights illuminated the area, startling the intruders. John watched silently as they froze, scanning the darkness for the source of the light. He could see the tension in their movements, their hesitation growing. Then a second sensor triggered, and a soft, loud alarm echoed through the clearing. The men stumbled back, confused and unnerved. John smiled quietly to himself. The measures he had taken were working, and the poachers were now uncertain of what lay ahead. John decided to escalate subtly. Using his knowledge of terrain, he had created small, non-lethal obstacles along paths that the intruders were likely to take. These were simple things, branches placed strategically, uneven ground, and hidden pitfalls that would slow movement and create confusion without causing injury. The poachers, unfamiliar with the terrain, began to struggle, tripping over roots and sliding down slopes. John observed their every move, noting how they reacted, learning about their patterns and maintaining his calm focus. This was a test of patience as much as skill. Hours passed with careful observation. The poachers, frustrated and increasingly aware that they were being watched, started making mistakes. They argued quietly, one accusing the other of being careless, while their movements became more erratic. John remained hidden, making no sudden moves, letting nature and strategy do the work. From his vantage point, he could see the forest responding to the intrusion as well. Birds scattered, deer disappeared, and even the wind seemed to whisper warnings. The mountain itself, it seemed, was aligned with him, alerting all who entered that this was not a place to be taken lightly. Eventually, the poachers reached a clearing near the fence that John had reinforced months earlier. From his concealed position, he could see them studying the boundary, clearly trying to determine the easiest way to bypass it. John allowed them to get close enough to reveal their intentions, but not so close that they could cause harm. Then, using a combination of lights, sounds, and his knowledge of their movements, he created a situation where they were effectively trapped within a small area of his property without realizing it. The poachers panicked, realizing too late that the mountain was not as simple as they had assumed. John did not approach directly. Instead, he let the measures he had installed, strategically placed obstacles, sudden illumination, and quiet alarms, create a sense of unease that forced the intruders to retreat. Over the next hour, John carefully monitored their movements as they tried to escape, making sure that they could leave without serious harm, but also ensuring that they understood the consequences of entering his land. The men eventually stumbled back down the path they had come, clearly shaken and unwilling to return. John spent the rest of the night observing the area to ensure no one remained. By the time dawn broke, the mountain was quiet again. Tracks of humans had disappeared, leaving only the faint signs of animals and the rustle of leaves in the wind. John allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction, not because he had confronted danger, but because he had maintained the safety of his land, the wildlife, and himself without unnecessary violence. His preparation, patience, and understanding of the environment had worked exactly as intended. The encounter left John reflective. He knew that the mountain would always attract attention, that others might be curious or reckless, and that the natural beauty of the area made it a target for those who did not understand or respect it. Yet he also recognized that his ability to adapt, plan, and act with precision allowed him to coexist with the wilderness in a way that few could. This experience reinforced his belief that protection was as much about intelligence and strategy as it was about courage. In the days following the incident, John focused on improving his measures even further. He studied the paths the intruders had taken, noting weak points and areas that could be reinforced. He added new observation points, improved his signaling systems, and created additional natural obstacles. His goal was not to intimidate anyone unnecessarily, but to ensure that the mountain remained a sanctuary where wildlife could thrive without interference. Each adjustment was made with care, blending security seamlessly with the natural environment. John also realized the importance of patience and observation in human behavior. The poacher's mistakes had not been forced. They had been revealed through careful planning and calm observation. He began thinking about how the same principles could apply to future challenges, whether natural or human. The mountain was a teacher, and John was a student learning lessons in patience, strategy, and responsibility every day. Despite the tension of the intrusion, life on the mountain returned to its quiet rhythm. Deer grazed in the meadows, foxes darted through the underbrush, and birds sang in the trees. John continued his routines, observing, maintaining, and enjoying the solitude that he had worked so hard to create. The incident had reminded him of the fragility of peace and the importance of preparation, but it had also reinforced his confidence in his ability to protect what mattered most. The experience of the intruders became a story he would reflect on often. John did not take pride in frightening them or asserting dominance. Instead, he felt satisfaction in knowing that his efforts had prevented harm, protected wildlife, and maintained the sanctity of his sanctuary. The mountain had tested him, and he had risen to the challenge without compromising his values or respect for life. In the weeks that followed, John noticed subtle changes in the behavior of the forest. Animals seemed less wary, paths that had been disturbed began to return to their natural state, and the overall sense of balance was restored. The mountain, once again, was a place of quiet strength and natural beauty. John understood that vigilance would always be necessary, but he also knew that his presence had created a safe, thriving environment where nature and human responsibility could coexist. By the end of this period, John had learned a crucial lesson. Isolation did not mean vulnerability. With careful planning, patience, and respect for the environment, he could maintain control without resorting to unnecessary force. The mountain had tested him, and he had succeeded, not through aggression but through strategy, observation, and deep understanding of the land. This experience marked a turning point in his life, strengthening his resolve and preparing him for whatever challenges might come next. John Matthews had not only built a home on the mountain, but had also established a system of guardianship, protecting both his own life and the delicate ecosystem he had come to love. He had transformed from a soldier trained for conflict into a caretaker, capable of defending his sanctuary with intelligence, patience, and respect. The mountain had become more than property. It had become a living partner, a place that demanded vigilance and rewarded wisdom in equal measure. The days following the Poachers' retreat were quiet at first, almost eerily so. John Matthews spent his mornings walking the familiar paths of his mountain, checking for any signs of new intruders. The forest had settled back into its natural rhythm, the rustle of leaves, the calls of distant birds, and the subtle movements of deer and foxes. Yet John remained alert. His instincts told him that trouble could return at any time. The peace he had created was delicate, and he knew that vigilance was the price of maintaining it. He spent hours inspecting the fences, reinforcing weak spots and clearing areas where visibility was limited. Every observation post was checked, every camera tested, and every trap or alarm system recalibrated. John was meticulous. He did not want to overreact, but he also did not want to be caught unprepared. The mountain had taught him that respect for the land included understanding the risks it could present, not just from nature, but from humans who did not share the same reverence. One afternoon, while checking the southern perimeter, John noticed fresh tracks in the dirt, human footprints, heavy and hurried, moving toward his property. This time, there were 3 sets of prints. He crouched behind a cluster of rocks and studied them carefully. The intruders were closer than before, and their movements suggested determination rather than curiosity. John felt a familiar focus settle over him. This was no longer a test of patience alone. It was a situation that required careful planning and readiness for action. John retreated to his cabin to prepare. He reviewed all his security measures and made adjustments for the new challenge. Motion sensors were repositioned to cover blind spots. Lights were angled to maximize visibility without disturbing wildlife, and cameras were checked to ensure every angle was captured. He also prepared emergency supplies and positioned himself in a concealed vantage point near the most likely path of the intruders. Unlike before, he was ready to respond more directly, if necessary, but always with the goal of preventing harm rather than causing it. As the sun began to set, John spotted the intruders through the dense trees. They were moving carefully, speaking in low tones, and scanning the area as they approached the reinforced fence. John observed quietly, noting that they seemed aware of previous obstacles. Perhaps they had learned from rumors of the mountain's defenses. Still, they underestimated the level of preparation John had implemented. He decided to use a combination of tactics to neutralize the threat. First, he activated a series of lights that flashed intermittently along the fence, creating disorientation. The intruders froze, scanning the area for the source. Then John triggered a system of alarms he had installed, low but piercing, designed to startle humans without causing permanent harm. The men stumbled back, unsure of where the signals were coming from. At the same time, John had arranged for natural obstacles, fallen logs, uneven terrain, and small pits covered with foliage, to slow their movements. Every step they took was now a calculated challenge, forced upon them by the very land they thought they could conquer. John remained hidden, observing their reactions. The intruders argued quietly among themselves, frustration clear in their body language. One suggested turning back, while another insisted on finding a way through. John's strategy was working. They were being led by their own mistakes and confusion, amplified by his preparation and intimate knowledge of the terrain. He did not move closer. He did not need to. Every action he had taken was designed to defend his property from a distance, protecting both himself and the wildlife that relied on the sanctuary he had built. Hours passed as the intruders tried to navigate the obstacles. Their progress was slow, hesitant, and full of mistakes. Each step they took revealed their unfamiliarity with the terrain, their frustration, and their lack of planning. John took notes in his mind, cataloging their weaknesses and anticipating the path they might take next. He felt a sense of calm determination. This was not about fear or aggression. It was about responsibility, foresight, and protecting life without causing unnecessary harm. Eventually, the intruders reached a part of the fence that John had designed to be a psychological barrier. It was visible but reinforced, strategically placed so that any attempt to breach it would be obvious and risky. The men hesitated, unsure how to proceed. John observed the tension between them, their growing fear, and the realization that they were not in control. He could see them considering retreat, and he knew that his plan was reaching its conclusion. Then came the final step. John used a combination of motion-triggered lights and subtle sound devices, creaking branches, faint thuds, and rustling leaves, to create the impression that they were being watched from multiple directions. The intruders, already disoriented by previous obstacles, panicked. They tripped over logs, slipped on uneven ground, and collided with one another as they tried to escape. John remained in his hidden vantage point, watching the mountain itself enforce the rules he had set. By midnight, the intruders had retreated, moving back the way they had come. Their hurried exit left clear tracks, but no harm was done. John waited until the first light of dawn to approach the area, checking to ensure that the fence and obstacles had not been damaged and that the wildlife had not been disturbed. He repaired minor damage, reinforced weak spots, and reset his observation posts. The mountain had been defended, not through violence but through preparation, strategy, and a deep understanding of the land. In the aftermath, John reflected on the events. He understood that the intruders might return or that others could attempt to enter. But he also knew that his careful planning had created a system of protection that would discourage further attempts. The mountain was more than property. It was a living environment that required respect, and John had proven that respect and preparation could coexist with vigilance and strength. The encounter also reinforced lessons that John had learned in the military but applied in new ways. In the army, success often depended on speed, force, and decisive action. On the mountain, success depended on patience, observation, and subtle strategy. He had learned to anticipate human behavior, use the terrain to his advantage, and create an environment where natural consequences enforced boundaries without unnecessary harm. These lessons extended beyond defense. They applied to all aspects of living in harmony with the wilderness. In the days that followed, John made further improvements. He added more observation points, carefully camouflaged to blend with the forest. He refined the motion sensors and alarms, ensuring that they were sensitive enough to detect intruders without disturbing wildlife. He also expanded his knowledge of animal behavior, studying patterns that might indicate human presence or potential danger. The mountain became a classroom, teaching lessons about vigilance, adaptation, and coexistence. Despite the challenges, life on the mountain remained rewarding. Deer grazed in open meadows, foxes played along the edges of the forest, and birds nested in the high branches. The quiet beauty of the wilderness was a constant reminder of why John had chosen this life. Each sunset, each rustle of leaves, and each call of the wild was a confirmation that his efforts were creating a space where life could thrive. The mountain had become not just a home, but a sanctuary for all living things. John also reflected on his own transformation. He had come to the mountain seeking peace, solitude, and purpose. The intrusions had tested him, but they had also strengthened him. He had learned that vigilance and patience could achieve what force alone could not. He had learned to read the land, anticipate threats, and respond with intelligence rather than aggression. These lessons extended beyond the mountain, shaping the way he viewed the world and his place within it. By the end of this period, John Matthews had fully embraced his role as guardian of the mountain. He understood that protection was an ongoing responsibility, requiring constant attention, adaptation, and respect for both nature and potential human threats. The intruders had come and gone, but the lessons they left behind were permanent. John had proven that a combination of skill, preparation, and patience could maintain peace without violence, creating a safe and thriving sanctuary in the wilderness. The experience also brought a sense of satisfaction and quiet pride. John knew that the mountain would always require vigilance, that the world beyond its borders could bring challenges, and that his efforts would never be complete. But he also knew that he had the skills, knowledge, and determination to meet those challenges. The mountain had tested him, shaped him, and ultimately allowed him to become more than a former soldier or a solitary man. It had made him a true protector, capable of maintaining harmony in a world where both nature and human behavior could be unpredictable. As night fell once again, John stood on a high ridge overlooking his property. The forest was calm, the stars began to appear, and the wind whispered through the trees. He felt a deep sense of connection, not just to the land, but to the life it supported and the lessons it had taught him. He knew that future challenges were inevitable, but he also knew that he was ready. The mountain was more than a place. It was a living partner, a teacher, and a testament to the power of preparation, patience, and respect. John Matthews had transformed his mountain into a sanctuary, defended not through aggression, but through wisdom, observation, and strategy. He had shown that even in the face of potential danger, it was possible to maintain peace, protect life, and live in harmony with the wilderness. The mountain had become a place where John could fully be himself, a place that reflected his values, his skills, and his deep understanding of the delicate balance between human presence and the natural world. Years had passed since John Matthews first arrived on the remote mountain. The seasons had come and gone, painting the landscape in ever-changing colors, from the vibrant greens of spring and summer to the golden hues of autumn and the silent whites of winter. Each season brought its own challenges, its own lessons, and its own moments of beauty. John had grown with the mountain, learning to move in harmony with its rhythms, to anticipate its moods, and to understand the delicate balance that made it a living, breathing world. The mountain had become more than a home, it had become a companion. John felt the land as if it were an extension of himself. He knew where every hidden spring flowed, where deer favored grazing in the mornings, and where the foxes would emerge as the sun set. He could predict storms by subtle changes in wind and cloud patterns, and had learned to listen to the whispers of the forest in ways that few could understand. Every detail, every shift in the environment was important, and John had honed a connection with the land that went beyond mere observation. Over the years, John had also become a guardian. Not a violent one, but a careful, strategic protector who understood that true safety came from preparation, respect, and intelligence. The poachers who had once tested him had never returned, and over time, John realized that the mountain itself was a deterrent. The combination of natural obstacles, observation points, and his quiet but consistent vigilance created a presence that warned intruders without the need for confrontation. The mountain had become a sanctuary not only for him, but for all the life it held. Wildlife thrived under his careful stewardship. Deer herds grew larger, foxes moved freely through the underbrush, and birds of all kinds nested in the high branches, filling the forest with their songs. Streams ran clear, and the forest floor was dotted with wildflowers in the spring and summer months. John took great satisfaction in seeing life flourish around him, knowing that his efforts had created a safe, balanced ecosystem. He did not interfere with the animals beyond observation and protection, understanding that true guardianship required restraint. Despite his solitude, John never felt lonely. The mountain, in its quiet majesty, offered companionship in a way the city never could. He found joy in small routines, tending to a garden, repairing a fence, clearing a trail, or simply sitting quietly on a ridge as the sun set behind the distant peaks. He wrote occasionally, keeping journals filled with observations of weather patterns, wildlife behavior, and reflections on his own journey. These writings became a record of a life lived intentionally, with mindfulness and care. John also reflected often on his transformation. When he had arrived, he had been a soldier seeking escape from a past filled with responsibility, danger, and memories too heavy to carry easily. Over the years, the mountain had helped him process those experiences, turning skills once used in conflict into tools for preservation and protection. Precision, patience, observation, and strategy all had become part of a life dedicated to harmony rather than violence. The lessons of the army had not been wasted. They had been repurposed, applied in ways that nurtured life instead of taking it. One of John's greatest satisfactions was knowing that the mountain remained untouched by careless human hands. Over time, he had expanded his knowledge of human behavior and adapted his protective measures accordingly. Signs, cameras, and natural obstacles remained in place, but they were subtle, blending seamlessly into the environment. Intruders were warned without feeling attacked. Those who entered uninvited often left quickly, their curiosity tempered by the quiet intelligence that guided the mountain's defenses. John never needed to confront anyone directly after the early years. His strategy had become both invisible and effective. The mountain had also taught him patience and humility. Nature moved at its own pace. Seasons changed, storms came and went, and animals behaved unpredictably. John had learned to respond with care rather than frustration, to adapt rather than resist, and to see every challenge as an opportunity to learn. Even when a tree fell in a storm, blocking a trail he had spent months clearing, he did not despair. Instead, he observed the change, adjusted his paths, and continued with his routines. Each obstacle became a lesson in resilience and adaptation. John's life was now a blend of routine and awareness, comfort and vigilance. He had created a space where he could be fully present, fully alive, and fully responsible. The solitude that had once seemed daunting now felt liberating. He was connected to the land, the animals, and the cycles of life in a way that brought him peace unlike anything he had experienced in the army or the city. The mountain had become a mirror, reflecting his discipline, patience, and dedication back at him. Occasionally, he reflected on the encounters with the intruders from years ago. He did not feel anger or triumph, only understanding. Those moments had been tests, opportunities to measure his preparedness, his judgment, and his restraint. They had forced him to refine his methods, to anticipate the unexpected, and to apply his skills in ways that honored both life and the land. Without those challenges, he realized, he might not have grown into the careful, capable guardian he had become. John also understood that the mountain had given him something more profound than protection or solitude. It had offered a chance at purpose. In the army, purpose had been clear but often heavy with responsibility and consequence. Here, purpose was gentle, steady, and rewarding in ways that nurtured rather than demanded. Each day, John's actions, repairing, observing, planning, supported life on the mountain. He had become a steward of the land, a protector of wildlife, and a careful observer of the delicate balance between humans and nature. He often walked to the highest ridge on the property, where he could see miles of forest, rivers, and distant peaks. Standing there, he felt a sense of calm pride. He had created something lasting and meaningful. The mountain was alive, vibrant, and safe. Wildlife moved freely, and humans were deterred from harming the sanctuary he had worked so hard to protect. Every detail, from the placement of fences to the care of gardens and paths, had contributed to this harmony. John had learned that control did not mean domination. It meant understanding, respect, and preparation. Over time, John began to document the lessons of the mountain more deliberately. He wrote detailed notes about wildlife, weather patterns, human behavior, and the strategies he had used to maintain security without harm. These notes became more than records. They were reflections on a life lived intentionally. John realized that his story could serve as guidance for others who sought to live in harmony with nature, to protect wilderness areas, or to find purpose in isolation and responsibility. Even in moments of complete solitude, John never felt lonely. He had developed a profound connection with the natural world, an awareness that life extended far beyond human concerns. He listened to the calls of owls at night, watched as deer cautiously crossed open fields at dusk, and observed the subtle interactions of foxes in the underbrush. Each interaction reminded him that life, in all its forms, was interconnected and deserving of respect. The mountain had become a living classroom, teaching him lessons about patience, empathy, and stewardship every day. John's health, both mental and physical, had flourished in ways he had not anticipated. The work of maintaining the property, observing wildlife, and moving through rugged terrain kept him strong and fit. The quiet of the mountain allowed him to process memories and emotions that had once weighed heavily on his mind. Sleep was deep and restorative, and the simplicity of life on the mountain brought clarity and focus that had been impossible in the city. The mountain had given him a life that was fully his own, shaped by discipline, wisdom, and respect for the world around him. By the end of this period, John Matthews had fully realized the purpose he had sought since leaving the army. He was no longer simply a man seeking peace. He was a guardian, a steward, and a participant in a living ecosystem. The mountain had tested him, taught him, and ultimately rewarded him. It had shaped his character, refined his skills, and offered a life of profound satisfaction. His legacy on the mountain was not one of domination or fear, but of care, vigilance, and harmony. Looking out over the valley as the sun rose one crisp morning, John felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The mountain was thriving, wildlife flourished, and his systems of protection were working seamlessly. He understood that challenges could arise at any time, but he also knew that he had the knowledge, experience, and preparation to handle them wisely. The years had transformed him from a soldier haunted by past memories into a man at peace, living in balance with the land he loved. John Matthews had become more than an ex-soldier living in solitude. He had become a true protector, a man who combined skill, patience, and intelligence to maintain life and harmony in a remote wilderness. The mountain had given him freedom, purpose, and a sense of achievement that few people ever experience. Through respect, careful planning, and dedication, he had created a sanctuary that would endure, a living testament to the power of vigilance, understanding, and the quiet strength that comes from living in harmony with nature. As the day ended and twilight settled over the mountains, John stood quietly on the ridge, watching the shadows stretch across the valley. The forest was calm, the animals moved freely, and the wind whispered through the trees. He felt a profound connection to this place, a bond formed over years of care, patience, and respect. The mountain was not just his home, it was a reflection of his life, his values, and the harmony he had worked tirelessly to achieve. In that quiet moment, John understood the true meaning of his journey. The mountain had not only provided peace and solitude, but had also given him purpose, mastery, and a life that was deeply fulfilling. He had faced challenges, adapted to them, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected to the natural world than he had ever imagined possible. The sanctuary he had built would endure, and with it, the lessons of patience, vigilance, and harmony would remain, a testament to a life lived fully, intentionally, and with respect for all living things.